The creator of Resident Evil, Shinji Mikami, is back to the survival horror genre that he so famously, made famous with the original Resident Evil. So, how did this one turn out? If I had to pick one aspect where the evil within really shines, it would have to be in its atmosphere and tension. While I never found myself sitting in a corner crying for mommy, which that honor goes to Alien Isolation, I did find the sense of tension to be at an all-time high for many parts of the game. The attention to detail in the environments and the settings are ultimately what do it. You always feel uneasy because while you know something is out there, you never quite know exactly where. The fact the game is a psychological thriller as much as it is an intense action game only adds to that stress. And this is a game where the walls disappear before your eyes, where enemies can materialize out of thin air, and where you're lost more so than you actually realize. Thankfully, the combat system is rock solid. You can tell this is a Mikami-san game. While using the shotgun, sniper rifle, or handgun, you get a real sense of power. The problem is that ammo is so hard to come by. You want to make every single shot count, and thankfully you can do just that because the controls are absolutely spot on. There's also a stealth mechanic where you can sneak up on unsuspecting enemies for an instant kill. The environments can also be used to your advantage, where you can lure enemies into bear traps, explosives, and much more. What happens when all of these elements are thrust upon you at once? You get choice. There's nothing like taking out a group of enemies with a well-placed explosive bolt from your crossbow when you only had one bolt left, or getting that perfect stealth kill when you were absolutely surrounded by enemies. It's moments like these that really make you feel like a badass, and it's absolutely awesome. Much like the Resident Evil remake on the Nintendo GameCube, the Evil Within features enemies that can resurrect themselves after they've been downed. The old burn the corpse mechanic from that legendary game returns here, and you'll want to burn all the bodies you come upon, especially later on in the game. Not only does this give you a little bit of peace of mind, but you also have the chance to gain additional supplies from burnt corpses, and that's extremely important. There's also a very simple crafting system in place here. While you scour the environment for ammo and syringes to heal yourself, the odds are high you'll also stumble onto several mechanical parts, and these can be used to craft ammo for the Agony crossbow. You can freeze, explode, electrocute, blind, or craft standard bolts. Not only can you find parts, but if you dismantle traps, you can gain additional crafting supplies. The catch here is that these environmental traps aren't just there for you to get caught up on or to make into parts, but like I mentioned before, you can actually lure enemies to these traps. So what ends up happening is you start to balance the desire for more ammo for your crossbow with an easier way to take down enemies. And I really like that. It really does empower the player to say, well, you know what, I have a lot of choices here. I also really enjoy the fact that exploration is rewarded. Players who thoroughly explore the various stages will find green ooze, which can then be used for upgrading your core abilities, from extending your health gauge and stamina to being able to hold more ammo. The progression system in place is utterly fantastic and scales perfectly with the rest of the game, so you never feel like you're overpowered. Even though you're well armed, don't expect this to be a cakewalk. You're gonna die, and a lot, because the simple miscalculation of, say, one of your shots will most likely cause you to die. If you want to use stealth, be extremely careful what you bump into. If you want to use more straightforward action, you absolutely have to make sure those headshots hit their mark, or you'll find yourself either without ammo or completely surrounded. And speaking of the overall difficulty, the boss fights are just crazy. Most of these consist of creatures that can down you in just about one hit, even if you have full health, so you don't want to screw up. Most fights require you either to use the environments to your advantage, such as when you fight the spider lady, which forces you to use fire against her. Others are more typical fights where you dodge and shoot and so on. But whatever you do, you most likely are going to die a couple of times, but you'll have an utter blast doing so. The audio-visual package is fantastic. I already touched upon how great the tension and atmosphere are, but the graphics and audio go the extra mile and they deserve being singled out. The environments vary quite significantly, from a stunningly detailed forest to a crumbling church to, well, pretty much anything you can imagine. Lighting is superb, especially with great fire effects. During the night you can see fog in the distance and there are stars twinkling far off in the sky, and there's just so many gruesome and disturbing elements, from disfigured faces of clowns just hanging on walls to bodies ripped apart everywhere. It's disgustingly beautiful. Audio is used sparingly so as only to give you little hints of the trouble ahead, but therein lies the genius. You'll always hear enemies sort of mumbling to themselves, or you'll hear footsteps and other ambient noises, but when trouble comes, the music picks up to keep your adrenaline rushing. Now, not everything here is peachy. Sadly, what starts off as sort of an intriguing storyline eventually just becomes way too convoluted for its own good. I found the main protagonist, Sebastian, just wasn't really interesting enough for me, and the supporting cast either, so I never really cared for what happened to any of these particular characters. The save system is also a little perplexing at times. While there is a manual save when you go to a specific location, and you can also save manually when you finish a chapter, the checkpoint system is kind of weird at times. Like I found, for example, right after I did, say, a boss fight, or say maybe a large encounter, I would be able to save. Yet other times the save would be right before like a cutscene before I would go into one of these counters, and it was just strange because every time I wanted to go back, I would have to re-watch the cutscene or re-skip the cutscene. I don't know, it made the game feel like the load times were taking forever because of just the placement of some of these save points. And the other thing is, I found that there were times where save points were really far from one another. It didn't happen all the time, but when it did happen and you died, it could be quite annoying. There are also some anomalies here and there. There's a couple of scenes where there's texture pop-in is present, there's some minor clipping issues, and depending on the camera angle, I found that the shadows can get so pixelated that they look like early PlayStation 2 rendered shadows. Now, these moments don't occur often, but they are very noticeable when they do. The Evil Within feels like a direct continuation of Resident Evil 4. It shares a lot in common with that masterpiece. It's tense, atmospheric, and has a great progression and combat system. Now, while the story is mostly forgettable, and to be really honest, I never actually felt scared in the game, overall the experience was a really good action romp and an adrenaline ride of disturbing imagery, great survival horror gameplay, and that classic Mikami formula. If you enjoy some of the more traditional survival horror games and don't mind necessarily not being completely freaked out, well, give The Evil Within a go. For the full written review, be sure to check out projectcoe.com.